Hello everyone, I'm Gina. I'm the Alumni and Stakeholder Engagement Manager at King's Business School. It's lovely to have you all here. Welcome to our first how-to event in collaboration with King's Business School and the Alumni Relations team. It's great to have so many students and alumni joining us here today at the Anatomy Lecture Theatre and Museum. I would also like to thank our audience for joining us through our Zoom live stream from around the world. So wherever you're joining us, thank you so much for choosing the time to spending your time with us tonight. This event is part of our How-To series, which is specifically created for students and alumni who are in the early stages of your career. It's also relevant for alumni looking to make a career change as well. You can find past webinars on our KCL Alumni YouTube channel, and don't forget that you can use our King's Connect platform to connect with your students and alumni, grow your network, join the mentoring program, and access your alumni benefits. You can also use our new initiative, Forever King's Edge, your one-stop shop where you can access tailored King's offers and opportunities to skill up and stand out from the crowd. Today we're honored to have our speaker, Rita Kakati Shah, distinguished King's alumna, founder and CEO of UMA, to share her experience on overcoming failures in a professional and personal journey. Rita's a very special alumni for me especially because she was one of the first person that I met when I joined the school last year. Just to mention a few of Rita's highlights, she is an award-winning gender, career and inclusion strategist, best-selling author of The Goddess of Go-Getting, which launched on International Women's Day, which is available in all major bookstores. And she also received the President's Lifetime Achievement Award for mentoring and supporting young women, young people and minority of all ages. So we're very lucky to have Rita all the way from New York. To begin the event, Caroline is going to start with a short introduction. Caroline is a final year student studying business management. And then we'll move on to Q&A for about 15 minutes at the end. For any of you who's going to ask some good questions, we've got some special signed copies that we're going to give away, so think of some good questions to ask. In terms of housekeeping, the toilets are just down the corridor on the left-hand side. There's no fire alarm scheduled today, so if you hear the alarm, please follow our staff down the stairs to the main entrance. If you have any questions about what we'll share today, do not hesitate to contact us. Our email address is forever@kcl.ac.uk or on our social media channels at KCL Alumni. If you would like to share this webinar with your networks, please don't forget to use the hashtag #ForeverKings. I hope you find today's discussion inspiring and insightful. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'll pass over to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much. I'm running through loud and clear, I can hear. First of all, good evening, and thanks to all of you joining us here today, and also thanks to everyone joining online. First of all, a bit about myself. My name is Caroline. I'm a final year business management student at King's Business School. What do I do that's also had failures too? And I think when looking around the room, we think we've all had failures, big or small, and we've all had to learn from them. For me personally, the failures that I have encountered so far have been mostly in the entrepreneurial field through the global nonprofit called Project Access, where I've worked the past couple of years, really excited about that, and my own startup called Water Fun. And Water Fun does, as the name says, a lot of fun on water, stand-up paddleboarding, which is definitely, when you have startups, there'll always be failures. More on the sort of corporate setting, which I'll also be happy to talk about later. Had a brief internship experience with Boston Consulting Group, which definitely, when you do the corporate stuff, there's so many more things to think about, and also means failure is inevitable, but learning also is. So a little bit deep dive into Rita and sort of who you are and why you're here today. So really, really delighted to have Rita join us here today. Other than founding UMA, sort of in response to her personal journey of motherhood, the transitioning careers and entrepreneurship, and she's dedicated to empowering women and minorities around the world. Prior to UMA, Rita led business development globally at CNS Healthcare. She began her professional career at Goldman Sachs here in London, where she was awarded the prestigious Excellence in Citizenship and Diversity Award. She's also a distinguished alumna of King's College London and a triple Stevie Award for Women in Business winner, and is also a judge for the Middle Eastern Awards. Rita is a graduate of King's Business School and is actively involved with the King's Leadership, Diversity and Entrepreneurial Institute mentoring programs, and is also a member of the New York and Los Angeles alumni communities. Rita actively coaches, mentors business leaders, veterans, survivors of domestic violence, women in technology and STEM, schoolgirls and students, and some of her mentors are even here today. She also serves as an advisor, ambassador, and diversity and inclusion expert to multiple boards and global organizations around the world. So as you can hear, we're joined by a really compatible and really nice lady here tonight. So this evening, we're going to explore the topics of failure through Rita's personal and professional journeys. So this conversation will be a great opportunity for both you as students and young alumni to learn from Rita's experience and gain insights to her learnings and how to navigate the first steps in our careers. So today, we'll turn our failures from a negative to a positive and highlight those failures as can be seen as an opportunity for growth and learning. So to fail means we've gained knowledge, and knowledge leads us to success in the long term. So let's spend the next 35 minutes exploring this topic in depth and to hear from our speaker, Rita, on how to overcome failures before breaking into a Q&A session. And remember to note down your questions if you have any along our talk. So please give a warm welcome to Rita Kakati Shah for today's how-to discussion. So Rita, welcome, first and foremost.
Thank you so much. It's such a wonderful pleasure to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
Thank you very much. Let's start at the sort of very beginning of coming to King's. How was your journey to KCL?
Oh, wow. So before I started at King's, so I went to school, and so my parents are Indian. They're from Assam in northeast India. And they both come from the medical background. My dad's a doctor, my mum was a zoologist. And back in my day, schooling was very spoon-fed, meaning that, you know, whatever you saw on a blackboard with chalk like this, you would memorize, learn, you would regurgitate at exam time. And I was really good at exams back then. So my parents were like, you're going to be a doctor. So actually, before my days at King's, I was actually at medical school. I was at Barts in London, and I started studying medicine. And from day one, this is the first time when I got to university, I thought, oh gosh, this is not school anymore. You're not spoon-fed. You've got to make your own notes. You've got to figure it out for yourself. Like, oh, wow, this is different. Freedom for the first time, that was the other thing. But I realized from day one that this wasn't me. Something didn't feel right. This was the first time I got to think for myself. And I knew something wasn't right. But it took me 2 whole years. I completed my preclinical because I didn't know how to tell my parents, this isn't for me. I did not want to let them down. I didn't want to be a failure in their eyes. This was everything to them. I didn't want to let them down. And my tutor at the time, for his perspective, statistics, you know, I was on the dean's list. I was performing really well. My memory is rubbish now, but back in the day, I had a really good memory. And it was memorization that got me literally through the exams. You know, I didn't go to many of the, ironically we're in the anatomy theatre today, but I didn't attend much anatomy because I didn't like the smell of what was in here, you know. So it was things like that. That was a lesson in itself that something wasn't right. So I guess in myself, it took 2 years and I thought, okay, enough is enough. And I made that decision, like, I'm now going to do something about this. So I spoke to my tutor, he understood. Barts in London were part of University of London, and I managed to then speak to, at the time, the head of the maths department here at King's, because I was like, you know what do I now want to do? Like, this is the first time I'm actually being asked, what do I want to do? I wasn't asked that question before. It was expected I was going to go into medicine. So this was the first time I thought, okay, what do I want to do? Let me look and reflect on this. I've always liked maths. I've always been good with numbers, so I thought, okay, maths is a good starting point. I always liked art. I was always like creative and painting and drawing and doing creative things like that. I loved French, you know, languages. I used to travel to, you know, Paris at weekends and whatnot. But then I thought to myself, like, in terms of having a degree discipline, I thought, you know, what was the hardest one to get just because I enjoyed doing the subject? And I thought, you know, it would probably be maths. I'm less likely to learn all of these incredible concepts from home or just because I like it. So I spoke to the head of the maths department and he goes, yeah, you know, come on board, we'll have you. And we had a great conversation, we stayed in touch. And I was about to start at King's. Then a week before term started, and we got these big brochures back then, and I'm sure you get them now as well, but about all of the different subjects. And this was from the management department. There was no official King's Business School back then. And I saw this business management thing, and this sort of a hybrid degree called Maths and Management. And I was just very intrigued. Knew nothing about it. I don't have that background. I didn't have the support network, but I was really intrigued. So a week before term started, he switched my degree over from maths to Maths and Management. And that's how my time at King's started.
Fantastic, and I think having such a last term switch is also a little bit of bravery, making a switch last minute. I don't know if I would have done it. So applaud with that. And of course, sort of following on from your maths and sort of management degree, you headed into sort of your first job, which was here in London at Goldman. So how was your route to that first corporate job?
Great question. And actually bringing it back to failure. At this point, I wanted to learn for myself. I didn't want to learn to make my parents happy. I didn't want to learn for somebody else. I wanted to learn because I wanted to explore a subject. So in a way, I didn't care about failure. I care about just expanding my mind and just I had that inquisitiveness to think this is the first time I'm exploring. So I actually came to get educated, you know, in the traditional sense of what is education for. And it was during this sort of lost moment because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And back in my day, we were sort of set up with buddies from the year above. They were called mums and dads, and I had my mums, who were my buddies, and this was done through the University of London back then, ULU. And she was going into a careers fair. I had no interest. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So she went in, and and this was at the Strand campus downstairs, or on the ground floor, and I just waited outside, and this lady walked out, and we were just chatting about everything and anything under the sun, about just different concepts. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Something about, you know, rates are going up, or like, you know, just asking about, you know, what are even rates? I didn't know what rates were. But we were just asking about the concepts and things about it. And then for a good 45 minutes went past, my friend came back, and this lady gave me her business card. And she said, well, you know what, our offices are down the road. I really enjoyed this chat. I did as well. It was a great conversation. She goes, I'd love you to come and meet some of my colleagues. And she happened to be the global head of recruitment at Goldman Sachs. So long story short, that's how my journey started. It did take me a good 2 weeks at least to email her back, because back then, late 90s, early 2000s, we didn't have iPhones and things, and you couldn't just email from that. You had to sign up to get into the computer lab, and you had to be on a wait list to log in to your KCL email, and I'm like, oh, I'll do it later. So 2 weeks later, and then I did it, and that's what started off the string of emails and interviews, and then I had 32 interviews at Goldman, to get into Goldman rather, because I was interviewing with 5 different divisions. Like I didn't know what I wanted to do, they didn't know where to place me either, so I interviewed with everybody, and we just kept going around, and it was just so much fun. I just remember it's been a really fun experience, because again, I went in not to get a job, I went in just to chat with her colleagues, because that's what it was about. I had nothing to lose at this point, right? So that was it, and then 32 interviews later, I got an offer to join an internship program in the pan-European area, in the equities division on the trading floor as a pan-European sales trader. So, yeah.
And following on from that sort of internship, you ended up joining them full-time?
Yes.
Fantastic. And sort of still the equities floor.
Yes.
Where I imagine if we look back to how does the equities floor look like at Goldman in the late 1900s, early 2000s, there aren't a lot of women there. So you joined as the first women. How was that sort of first job experience walking into the trading floors at the Goldman?
It's really interesting actually, because before you join full-time, you go on the training program. And in the training program, there's, you know, different folks from different divisions, you're all together. You go to New York for the training program. So that was my first proper experience of New York. Really fun times there. And there were lots of women there. You know, it was quite 50-50 mix. But then when I actually got to my role on my team, there were the odd other women, but I was the only woman on my team. Certainly very few people of color as well. And, you know, I'll give you an example, and this is going to be an exaggerated example just to give you the idea, but, you know, back then, it certainly was, you know, I could look at the IT desk and there'd be just people from India there, or I would look at the Latin American desk and there'd be people from Latin American countries. I'd just come back from a backpacking trip to Guatemala, and I'm like, I want to practice my business Spanish. Like, how do I get in there? So just having these natural questions. I've always been a connector. I've always been social. Like, where were the other women? Like, I just wanted to know where they were so we can have professional connections. Like we did on the internship program before that, where you got to rotate. I was like, why can't we do that now? So I got involved in diversity and inclusion initiatives before it was a thing. It wasn't called that back then. But because it's a virtue of just me being inquisitive and just being a woman and just being, a person of color, really. But it was great. I really loved it. I didn't ever think, gosh, I felt different because I'm a woman or nothing like that. I didn't ever let that define me. Because I came in, again, I wanted to learn. And I'll just give you an example, Caroline, that being on the trading side, I had to deliver a morning wrap one morning, and this was like literally only a week in, so it wasn't very long in. What that entails is that at 6:30 a.m., you go into a room with the other traders, you present 3 ideas, and whatever those 3 ideas are is what gets presented and traded upon throughout the rest of the European sales team. So it's quite a big deal. But they give it to you early on because they're like, you're part of the team. Boom, you got to do it. So I went in there. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know how to turn the hoot on the mic. I sat in my chair. I was like, kerfuffling away. I just opened up the FT 5 minutes before, and I thought, well, let me just pick up random 3 stories. It was a total flop. Nobody was listening. It was really like everyone was talking. I got the pat of shame on the way out of the room. Like, oh, Rita, like what happened there? And I'm like, oh God, yeah, that wasn't great. So I left. But at that point, I thought, you know what? That was really bad. It really was. I want to do it again. So I put my name down on the roster for a couple of weeks later. And then I got another pat. I was like, oh, that's brave. Are you sure about that? And I really wanted to know what happened. So I put my name down, and I spent the next 2 weeks just watching and observing and seeing how everyone else did it. There's always loud people in the room, someone that speaks more than others. I saw who they were. So what the patterns were, the ones that people seem to listen more to and have more of an attention. How do they stand? How do you turn on the hoot? I knew how to do that now. Just little things like that. I just wanted to observe body language. Who gets the most respect? Is it because they crack jokes? Is it because of this? Is it the story? What was it? So 2 weeks had passed. I got in super early that day. One of my jobs as being a newbie was to get coffees for everyone on the floor. So I got in early because one of my biggest hurdles was how do I get around the revolving doors without spilling everything. So I got the doorman, I got everyone involved in the process, so we got there successfully. And I went that morning to the 3 loudest people on the floor that had the really great ideas, but they were the ones that I always saw interrupt everybody else. And I asked each of them for their 3 top ideas. And they were like, oh, that's nice, and got chatting, and I wrote their ideas down. And I went into the room for the morning wrap, and I picked one of their 3, so I had my 3 ideas. And I knew how to turn on the hoot, so I turned it on, and I just waited. And I waited until it was pin drop silence. At that point, I stood up. I wasn't sitting down anymore. I stood up, and I delivered my 3 ideas, and I gave a shout out to the 3 people that gave me their ideas. And at the end, I got an applause. And the reason I share that story, because I didn't at any point think I failed the first time because I'm a woman, or I'm a person of color, or I'm too short, I'm too this. I sucked. I was really bad. I didn't prep. And I did my research this time. And I didn't get interrupted because I gave a shout out to the people that normally do the interrupting, and I used their ideas. But I didn't have to do the work myself, so that was actually another thing that I figured out. So it was just things like that. And I have tons of examples of this. And that was inequity as I moved on to fixed income and I went on to do different roles. But I have so many ideas like that where you could say you failed or you had this, but for me, these were learning experiences. I was there to learn. I was there to think, well, how can I do better? Yeah, that wasn't so good. Take the feedback, take that critique, you've got to. And that's sort of literally what panned out my next 10 years, at the next decade at the firm.
I think that definitely speaks to the mindset that you walked into that office with of failure is a learning point and it's sort of inevitable for all of us. I think in comparison to myself, yes, there is loads of failures out there, but sometimes I'm like, okay, I've really, really failed at this. When do I then get in that mindset to say, but how do I analyze, how do I take that going forward? I think personally, it sometimes just takes a little bit longer because we're comparing sort of our age. We have means of comparing ourselves to everyone at every point in time, be that LinkedIn, be that Instagram, like no matter where you go or speak to people, you've got inputs of how other people are doing. So what if I didn't do so great? Then that just becomes sort of the failure that was maybe down here. It can grow and grow and grow and grow until it's maybe too large to tackle. But there's absolutely something in breaking down and say, you know what? If there's a way of going forward about this, how do I then do it? And how do I do it in a way where I can bear in mind yourself? You mentioned, hey, maybe I can't find the 3 best stories. Well, figure out how I can get other people to feed me those 3 stories. And so there's a smart way of going about it as well, which I imagine those 3 people, they were not in the least sort of panned by that you taking their ideas when you actually gave them credit for it. Super, super interesting story. So you shuffled around a bit, both at Goldman, taking away loads of learnings, I can imagine, one of these stories in particular. And sort of after a decade at Goldman, you then took sort of a career turn. And could you explain what sort of happened after those 10 years and how you pivoted sort of for the first time?
Yeah, so, a decade went by, been through so many downturns, a couple of downturns in the market since then, and then a family friend approached me. A family friend happened to be actually the former chair of the Institute of Psychiatry here at King's, as it happens. That he had this great idea. He was like, oh, Rita, you've got a business background. I want to set something up to do with clinical trials and drug development in Delaware. Will you help me? So my first question is, what's Delaware? Not where is it? It's a tax haven in the States where you set up companies and things like that, but I didn't know that. I was like, is this some sort of a product? Is this a service? What is this thing? So I was intrigued. So long story short, that's how I got my feet wet in a completely different industry. And for me, this was actually more reflective of the real world. When I was at Goldman, and absolutely loved it there. And it was one of actually the most bittersweet moments ever when I decided to transition, because I didn't know they were my family. It was my first and only job out of university. They literally latched onto Goldman, and I was totally part of the team because, my own parents couldn't support me in this, ever since I left medicine. So they were my family, and it was almost like, how do I do this? And wow, it's, but then they supported me, and you've got to do what feels right for you. And then I was moving into the smaller company, the world of the SMEs out there, where it's totally different, where I was used to all of documents, everything, where your I's are always dotted, your T's are always crossed, to none of that. And to me, that was interesting. That was the new wow. I've not seen this before. There was a funny story, actually, Caroline, where we're about to present to a client in this pharmaceutical new arena that I was in. And I'm like, well, don't you think we should get this printed in color and get it spiraled brown to make it, nice and pretty? They're like, yeah, Rita, there's a FedEx Kinko up the road. And I'm like, wow, I've got to do this myself. I'm used to managing teams, multinationally at this point, where I hit a button or I send an email, and then miraculously an hour later I'll get these beautiful presentations. But there's a process that goes behind that. And not once did I ever think about that process until I was in that situation of doing it myself. And I thought, wow, this is real life. And I was missing out on this because I was in a bubble. That bubble is reflective of real life in a different way, but this is a bubble and this is real. And I'm thinking, wow, so this was my next thing. And I was involved in business development, which meant I got to travel to lots of places. And I've always loved traveling. So this was almost like a blessing. And those travels took me here, there, and everywhere. And that's how I ended up in New York. And that's sort of where I live now, and met my now husband and have 2 kids. They're now 7 and 9. So that's how that transition happened.
There's definitely sort of the pharma industry to equities and sort of investment banking. There is a bridge gap there. But I get what you're saying with sort of coming down to what are some of the bare essentials of what I'm doing, what is the job delivered, and all those functions that you then got to see yourselves, they were happening at the place at Goldman. It's just who did we see and who did actually deliver that? I think at least for me, I am at the point where I'm the one doing all the stuff right now, and welcome to life as students, graduating straight as of now. We'll be heading into the nitty-gritty stuff, at least that's what I've been doing. Sort of ending up in New York, and I'm just aware of time as well, I really want to talk to you about UMA as well, because after sort of you had your kids and you're heading back into the job market, Your experience, can you tell us about what you experienced from trying to head back into the job market, and then what led you actually to start UMA from that point on?
Yeah, so that was another huge actually transition, and actually one of the most meaningful moments in my life, really, that pivoted to what I'm doing now. So initially, I was at a small company, so I said, it has lots of good things, but some of the other sides of a small company is that, and being in the States, is when I was pregnant for my son, who's now 9, I remember going to my, at the time, boss and said, hey, what's the plan? UK have up to a year on maternity leave, paid blah, blah, blah. And then he just looked at me, puzzled, and said, well, we can give you 6 weeks off, unpaid, of course, and you have to file a disability claim to get that. So it almost felt like a slap on the cheek. I was like, oh my gosh, wow, that's actually a huge reality of where I am. So I actually ended up quitting that job because of that, and I delved head over heels into my new career transition of motherhood, and I call it a career transition because not once was I not working. Out of all of the jobs I ever did, by far the most challenging was when I became a parent. I took my own mum for granted until I became one. You're not just working 24/7, I was at banking. You never get a sick day. You're always sleep deprived. It's Saturday morning, I want to have a lie-in. Oh, it doesn't work that way. So just things like that I learned a lot. But I also noticed that there were certain skills that I picked up specifically in this new career of mine, this unpaid career of mine. Things like communication skills. I thought, I was a pretty good communicator. I can stand or sit in front of a room full of people, I can present a PowerPoint. But I didn't realize that was barely scratching the surface of what communication is. Communication is listening, it's empathy, it's being able to read the room. It's not just verbal. When you have these babies in front of you, they can't talk when they're babies, but you have to understand what is it that's going on. You've got to figure it out. And that is a skill that I could never have got in the paid workforce. It's something that doesn't naturally come, right? And then the other one is negotiation. I joke all the time that if you can negotiate with a toddler or later on with an adolescent, take that conviction to your next job interview or boardroom interview or something. So really, it was things like that. I was learning a lot, but then I saw the big disconnect with this incredible talent pool and the job market, specifically in New York, my new home now. And I thought, gosh, there is a gap that suddenly when you have taken some time for your family or to look after a sick parent or to serve in the army, military, whatever it is, whatever reason it is, when you are now looking to transition back into the paid workforce, there's a disconnect. Harvard Business Review did a study that if you apply for a job and you put on your CV that the reason for your career break, whatever you call it, is parenthood, motherhood in particular, you are 50% less likely to be even called for a job interview than if that career break was because you'd been let go. Because if you've been fired, oh, poor hard-working person, it wasn't their fault. Versus, this person chose something over their career. How can they be career-oriented? That is the unfortunate mindset. And this isn't just men-driven, it's men, women, it's all genders and backgrounds. That's what we were dealing with, and that's why I started UMA, a company to really fight this bias, to turn it on its head and to figure out how do we empower, how do we build confidence, how do we break that bias, how do we empower this incredible women and minorities out there through coaching, through mentoring, consulting, and work with the companies on what they can do better to understand this incredible talent pool. We talk about diversity and inclusion all the time, but to really understand what is it? It's not just a fad of, yes, we're just going to check a box because I've got people that look diverse, I'm going to take a picture and that's it. No, it's that sense of belonging. 79% of people leave the workforce because they don't feel like the sense of belonging. And that's a problem. And people weren't doing enough of that, and that's why I started UMA.
Sort of UMA Up to Date, of course, it's consulting of women sort of going into the workforce afterwards, but even the entrepreneurial journey can't have been easy, coming from, again, corporate to startup, which is very, very different. Definitely you went from not doing many sort of background activities, doing a little bit more, and now you're doing everything, at least in sort of the startup phase. How was sort of not the failure journey, because there'll be loads, but is there anything you pick out where you're like, okay, so in my UMA sort of journey, this was where I sort of had a failure, where I learned the most from it?
Oh my gosh, everything. I was now an entrepreneur. I've been in the corporate world, I've been in the pharmaceutical world, I've been in salaried roles. So it's very different to now doing your own thing. I thought, when you're in the corporate world, you have contacts, you have this, you can easily get a meeting with so-and-so. Suddenly you're an entrepreneur, nobody wants to talk to you. I joke and I call myself Rudolph because like I got like a red nose because of the amount of doors that were just shut in my face, you know, in a proverbial sense, obviously, because of the fact that you are now a nobody. But you hear no all the time. But ultimately, it's that passion. I knew there was a need. I knew there was an incredible talent pool that I had to help. I knew there was a disconnect with what was actually being done in companies. I had the data to prove it. That was the other thing. And it's just a matter of fighting for what you believe in, that passion, having the data, having the research, knowing that you have an issue that you're trying to solve, and you just go on at it. You go on at it. When you're in the startup world, when you try to get people to go after you or, you know, financing out there, you know, 80% of startups fail. 99% of people, when they try to get funding from a VC, fail. But that 1%, if you have that patience to go for that, and you have your journey, and you keep switching your pitch as you go along, that's where the success happens. So don't give up on failure. It's not failure, it's a learning process. It always is.
I think especially with the startups that are somewhat mission-driven, again, the same sort of coming from Project Access, I spoke to a guest lecturer of mine, actually, who was helping sort of securing fundings for startups. And what she told me was, you know, when you're pitching this idea, go as broad and as big as you possibly can. Anything that your startup is doing to tackle mission-wide, nationwide, global challenges, blow it up so they know the magnitude of your ideas and what you really want to do sort of with life. And that also, of course, puts you on the stand. I really want to, one, change the world, and I believe I can do it, not trying to shake him behind, but actually believe I can do it. And sort of when you got that convincing down, there's definitely some way to go for exactly for funding and for getting people involved. Because one thing is that you're super passionate, but you're always selling both the organization and yourself, because one, people are coming to work with you, but you're also selling sort of what you're doing and why it's the most important thing they can possibly go and do with their time in their life. And there will be failures along the way of that, absolutely. But especially sort of in the funding stage, that's where, at least in Project Access, we've done a lot of learnings on how do we make sure to show people what we really do is, again, this world-changing thing? Because for us it is, but how do we communicate it? And we definitely failed loads of time not communicating how great of a thing we think it is and how we think we can sort of change the way that our leaders lead the world with our little organization. And I really want to keep bearing in mind time, The Goddess of Go-Getting. There's an amazing book that's here in front of us. Remember that for the Q&A session, there are, for the greatest question, signed books up for grabs. You recently published The Goddess of Go-Getting, which is, first of all, really, really exciting. Congratulations. It's published here in February. Can you give us a sneak peek of the book and how it's sort of relevant to the students and sort of recent graduates in the room?
Yes, so it took me over 2 years to write The Goddess of Go-Getting. It's something that's been in the making for a while. Because initially I thought I'm going to write a business book because I've got a lot of stories to tell about, you know, different industries, you know, salaried roles, finance versus pharmaceuticals versus entrepreneurship, and I thought I'm going to make this a business book for everyone out there. But as I started to write, I kept going into my personal story over and over again. And then I thought, oh gosh, this is not a business book, it's getting more like a memoir at this stage, like I'm crossing genre here. But then I thought, why do I have to band myself? Why do I have to try and force myself to fit into a particular narrative? And then I realized I couldn't tell one without the other. So The Goddess of Go-Getting it uses my personal stories to talk literally through my professional life, and using so many personal anecdotes. I've lived in lots of countries, so I talk about cultural nuances, I talk about intersectionality, I talk about diversity, just being a minority, talking about my journey at Goldman. Several stories like the one I shared today are in there. And it's a book for everyone. It's called The Goddess of Go-Getting because I named it after my company, Uma. Uma is a goddess in Hinduism. She's a mother, she's a daughter, she's a sibling, she's a wife, she's really empowering. And that's ultimately what The Goddess of Go-Getting is about. It's that empowerment feeling. But it's for everybody. It's not just for women. It's not just for students. It's for leaders out there. And I wrote it, so those of you that might read it afterwards, I wrote it in a prose that was very different to what I'm used to reading myself. I've co-authored books before. I've written tons of research papers as well, especially my pharmaceutical days and whatnot. And I've read other books that are empowerment. I've read other books on diversity and inclusion. I honestly fall asleep if it doesn't captivate me within the first paragraph. And I wanted to write this in a way that everyone can pick up and they get it. Like even the word minority, I like redefine it, so that everyone understands it. Whereas typically you think, oh, I'm a minority, I come from a certain ethnic background. For me, minority isn't just that. It's literally the dictionary term. If you are the lesser of a number, you are a minority. And we've all been in that situation. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be a vegetarian in a room full of meat eaters. You could be of one religion at a separate, festival. You could be a pregnant woman. I've been there too. And, somebody in a drinks thing forgot to put water out. It happens, So it's something that every single person at some point in their life has that feeling. And similarly, there's so many examples and excerpts in there about bias and phrases that we all toss here and there that define what we talk about diversity inclusion. But I sort of almost redefine that in a way that everyone understands, because when you understand it, you feel empowered, and that's where the change making happens.
It's definitely something to take away both from us as students heading into either new careers or already are in careers, to learn a little bit more about these terms that we have spoken so much about in our everyday life. And it's becoming, I don't think people are woke anymore. We're just in a time where we are all super aware of what's happening around the globe in our sort of context and how we interact with each other, both across diversities and so on. So really excited. I hope I have the time, now that I'm done with exams, bless you who are not done yet, you'll get there soon, that I actually had the time to do some free reading. I'm super excited about this. Finally, because we are moving into the Q&A session in a second, do you have sort of the students and alumni in the room who are sort of navigating the first steps in their careers? We talked through loads of different career steps now. What is happening in the very corporate world? What's happening when you go into smaller businesses, working at different times? What's happening with entrepreneurship? But for the people who are taking this really, really first step in their career now, if you had one takeaway or two possibly to give to them, what would those be?
It's a great question. I would say this goes back to my days when I actually changed from medicine and then I went into maths and management. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Don't always go out there, because I know there's spring week, there's internships, all of this, and everybody wants to miraculously always go for the same jobs. And that puts so much pressure on you. And the other thing as well, I would say to add to that, when we think of the word career and career strategy, career management, the word career in itself is a little bit redundant, to be honest, because it suggests it's like a long-term thing. In my parents' day, yes, that's exactly what it was. You graduated with something and you retired with that same something. That's not the case anymore. You might end up with an internship with your first job in a topic, a subject, but 2 years later, you might be doing something completely different. That's the new norm. So don't put that pressure on yourself. Do something, try it, enjoy it. Whatever you do, enjoy it. Don't be like, oh, I got that one, I didn't want that. You enjoy it. Ultimately, what's going to get you noticed by an employer isn't always the company you've got on your CV, your resume. It's your experiences, what you did with that. What are the real life stories? What's your personal story and journey that you can share? So that's one thing I would leave. And just, as the tagline for UMA, I would finally end on is be bold, be you, be UMA.
Be UMA. And I think on those words, first of all, thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you, Karen. They're great questions.
Yeah.
So.
And now, hopefully, we'll try to open up to the floor. If there are any questions, okay, fantastic. We have microphones coming around, and then we'll get the conversation going from there. Fantastic.
Okay. No?
Or I should just shout it out, Julie.
So I just need to speak up then. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for coming here, all the way from New York. So I like how you talked about working with your passion and being passionate about the stuff that you do, which is also something I recognize because I work in politics. But I was wondering if you maybe want to share a bit about the other side of the coin of passion, which is often burnout. Because I see women in my company, or not my company, the company I work for, where they are sort of responsible for the social stuff, or then they have household work and a very tight schedule, bad work-life balance, but they're in there for their passion. How do you, in your company, foster a culture that tries to avoid that, basically?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a great one, and actually there is actually a chapter in my book dedicated to that. It's literally about recognizing where your limit is and what you want to be doing. So those people that are happy doing a million different jobs, that some people are, that's fine, but there is a way of communicating and I call it sharing the care, sharing responsibilities around, and being very clear and concise with how you do that. In the workforce, when you are looking after a team, for example, or even you guys that are studying right now, when you have team meetings, you share out responsibilities. And you probably find that whether you're in the workforce or whether you're studying, that the clearer the responsibilities are, what everyone needs to do, the clearer it is who's going to do what and by when. It's the same thing with home responsibilities, right? Don't just assume you're the one going to take it on, but if it's not communicated in a clear way what the expectations are of getting something done, you're going to be stressed out more about, I've got to do it. We as women, it's, where we are more perfectionists by nature. We like things done a certain way. But because of that, we are good communicators. We need to take advantage of that. So I would say twist it a little bit, use your incredible communication skills your political communicating skills as well, to kind of use that to your advantage. Communicate what you want to get done, short steps, sweet steps, and then that might help. And with the burnout part, don't be shy of saying no and putting boundaries. You don't have to be rude about it, so, I'm not going to do that. No, you can just say, let's revisit this in a week. As in, that's my barrier right now, but I'm not saying no, I'm just going to come back and let's have this conversation later. So there are ways of tackling it and politely pushing back. So that can help with burnout as well.
That's very practical.
I think especially on this sort of small, can we get the microphone going? And then in the meantime, just comment on the small steps of saying, especially with mission-driven, because the missions are so huge, so how are we ever going to solve it? But the small things that I do on a weekly to weekly basis, they all add up, and sort of being happy with that and making sure that you put those small milestones in really resonates. And question?
Hi, thank you very much for your really insightful talk. It's really amazing hearing about your journey over the past 20 years. You mentioned cultural nuances that you've been able to explore over your journey. And I've noticed in the past few years, I'm still, in the early stages of my career, but I've noticed in the past few years, at least in the West, the narrative around, women's roles, women's empowerment in the workforce has really evolved. But would you say that the narratives are evolving on a certain scale within a certain cultural realm? Or have you noticed discrepancies within different cultures or in different communities?
Great question. There are tons of nuances. By no means do we have anything that is, gender equality right now. We don't. There is more of awareness of it, certainly in the West, to your point. But there are little things that we all fall into this gender stereotypes. And I'll give you an example. So, it's very easy to say, when we're at colleges or universities or at organizations, yes, everyone should do more to kind of make sure that you're hiring or your student recruitment or whatever is more kind of diverse and looks into different populations and, gender equal, neutral as much as possible. But then you think about home. How are conversations shaped at home that you have with your parents, that you might have with siblings, with partners, if anyone, is living with other people right now, with children, what are you saying, what are you doing? And I'll give you an example. This is something stereotypical, but, you might be at a barbecue at the weekend and everyone's gender equal, everyone's talking, having conversations together. Then at some point, you're going to find that all the men end up cooking the meat and the women end up just picking up dishes. That's a stereotypical example, but it happens in every society and culture around the world. There are little things like that. In some places more prevalent and others not so much. So it's little things like that you can do a little bit. So for example, I try to say that you can do it in a subtle way. There are people of, say, my parents' generation and their parents' generation that you could say are stuck in their ways. That's their culture, that's how they do it. But the newer generation is the generation of change makers, right? My kids, they're my change makers. When we go around to people's houses or whatnot, we're hosting people. You know, my parents are both like hosting people, asking, can I get you something? They're both sort of picking up plates or doing this. So they don't see the differences because that's the way they've been brought up. Similarly, do your bit. We are all, everyone in this room is a change maker. It starts as a domino effect. If you do something yourself, or you're conscious, do it in a subtle way. You don't have to be disrespectful of somebody's culture, the way they're doing it. Do it in a way that is respectful of others, but makes changes happen, if that makes sense. And then that is how things start to change.
Thank you.
Fantastic. I'll have a question.
Hi. First of all, thank you for sharing your experiences. It's really great to hear from you. My question is actually divided into two parts, which is kind of interrelated. So first of all, you talk about go-getting, and I, as an aspiring entrepreneur myself, I think that for an entrepreneur, go-getting is very essential. So from your experience, do you think go-getting has been a really successful or maybe a challenging aspect in your career? And for the second part, with go-getting, you really need to strategize it to, get the right result from it. So how do you suggest us to actually strategize those things?
Great questions. And there's another chapter in the book about this as well. So I try to define the difference between empowerment and entitlement. And the go-getting is very linked to that. So for me, when you're empowered, it's about using your voice. It's about having that self-awareness and that confidence, that go-getting confidence. But the empowerment side is you are a great listener. You have empathy first. You read the room first. You observe what's going on. So as an entrepreneur, it's so important to really observe and read what is your market telling you. There might be times where you want to do something, but the market just isn't there. It's telling you something opposite. You have to take that, and that's part where the empowerment comes in. The other side of that is the entitlement part. And I get that a lot of employers come to me and say, you know what, we have a lot of students that come to us and they feel entitled, they want to do this and do that. And I'm like, okay, there is some sort of miscommunication happening. What I'm finding is that everybody should use your voice, but you've got to see what is the end result, what am I trying to achieve from it. So when you get that go-getting, you go-get, read the room first, have empathy, listen, see what the situation is, listen to others, understand others first, because that's the first lesson in anything. You can't go get without understanding that. What are you getting otherwise, right? So I would say that, that there is a difference between being entitled to do something and then just being empowered. The message of go-getting is about being empowered. How do you get that passion across in a way that is understood and resonates with others?
Hello. So thank you for sharing your story. And I just want to go back to overcoming failures, and particularly, I very much admire your resilience and your kind of continuation throughout those challenges. But in terms of, for some as well, with failure, doubt and losing confidence that comes along with it as well. And so during those, I guess, those difficult periods, and especially would be very useful for me as an undergraduate, but what helped you during those moments to stay on the course and to keep pushing through and not letting confidence, losing confidence or doubting yourself come through?
That's a really great question. And I talk about confidence, the whole book is about that. But another example I share is that I've lost my confidence several times. And one example is, for example, when I had my kids and I wasn't in the paid workforce and I wasn't current on what's going on in finance or whatever, because I just, I was so busy with the kids. If people ask me, what book are you reading? I'd read Goodnight Galaxy or Thomas the Tank Engine. I don't know, it's what they're reading, not something else, So just things like that. And I would be petrified when my husband would say, hey, let's get the date night babysitter out tonight. I'm going out with some colleagues, they're bringing their wives, whatever. I'd be like, I would think of any excuse under the sun not to go out. My kids are, luckily I was fortunate they slept through the night. I'd be like, they might wake up in 12 hours if I should stay here. The most bogus excuse, because I didn't want to go out there. What if they asked me a question? What if they said, oh, you're just a mum? Or what else do you do? What else do you do with your day? And I'm like, I'm working all day long, I'm looking after them. There is so much that you do. And I didn't have that confidence to express it then. But it took me years to figure that out. And when you lose your confidence, it doesn't matter how many books you read, how many people you talk to, it comes from within. That go-getting, that confidence, only you can fix. But when you have that self-awareness, you think, okay, this is where it's coming from, I know it. That's the moment of entitlement, or sort of enlightenment, where you can start thinking, okay, this is it, this is what I need to work on, and what I'm going to do about it. That makes sense?
Hi, Rita. Yeah, hello. Thanks so much for speaking to us today. You went from being a student straight into the corporate world, and Goldman Sachs no less, so obviously, very much a big, huge company in the corporate world. How did you get people to take you seriously at that beginning stage of your career? So I've not gone to Goldman Sachs, but I'm in the corporate world, and I have gone straight from being a student. How do you deal with sort of imposter syndrome almost, if you ever felt it? Sometimes I'm sat across from people whose careers are longer than the entire time I've been alive. So how do you get them to be like, no, I'm here, and I'm here to do a job, and get them to take you seriously, basically?
That's a great question. So an example of imposter syndrome, when I first went in to do this morning rap, I was like, oops, that wasn't right. But I wasn't an imposter, I was just bad. I just took it upon myself, saying, okay, I need to improve on this. So I think, understand what your barriers are. Ultimately, you've got to do really well at your job. If you don't do your job really well, then it doesn't matter about everything else. That's all fluff. Your daily job, you have to get that done. And that's the first thing, and do that as best as you possibly can. That's what's ultimately going to keep you there. At Goldman and other banks as well, we had something called quartiling. Once a quarter, the bottom quarter from your performance would just be let go. No reasons, nothing. They just wasn't, they would be just gone. So you have that pressure as well. And that's why I'm saying you have to do your job first, as best as you can. And then you get involved in other initiatives, networks, and this, and whatnot, and start meeting people and mingling. But that comes afterwards. So the first thing is understand your job, get that done first, speak to your manager if you need to find a buddy or someone that has just done something similar. Get that help that you need. Get yourself a mentor then at some point when you're more, you're feeling more comfortable about that. A career mentor is essential, to help you, okay, what's my next steps? What am I going to look at doing? Where should I stay here for a bit? Should I kind of venture outside? They can help you with that. They've been there for longer. And a career mentor / a career champion later on in your career that can actually pull you up the ladder as you want to start getting into those promotion positions. That makes sense.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. I actually have 2 questions. First one is, how did you overcome your parents' pressure when you switched majors? And the other question is, are there any KCL resources that you found helpful in your career? Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. So when I switched, back in my day, and I don't honestly know how it's done today, so actually I'll turn that over to Gina and team to maybe answer that part of it. But back in my day, there wasn't the support as much. Once you apply through UCAS, you do the thing. If you switch, it's for you to figure out how you're going to switch. I wasn't automatically getting a phone call thinking, oh, you've left medicine, here, why don't you do this? It doesn't happen that way. I had to go out there, and again, that Rudolph shutting doors thing, knocking on doors, picking up the actual dialing telephones back then. You couldn't email. There were no email addresses then. You just had to literally show up. Hopefully there'll be somebody that will talk to you. And that's how it was. And then have a conversation, find out about the degree that way. There was no website to look at then, right? So you had to ask permission to get sent through a prospectus of what you're going to study. So that was that. And then in terms of the career support, later on, certainly my day, so this was before it was officially King's Business School, but for me, it was my personal tutor at the time. She was really, really good at helping, and she came from a finance background herself. She was a former finance professional, but she came from that background, so she really, really helped. With me, I had a different route to finance, but with other people on the course, she would really help with, what are we going to look at, what industries, what marketplaces, who knows, what contacts, things like that. So that was my experience, but I don't know if, Gina, you'd want to add something in terms of current day help for students.
Definitely. From an alumni school student. We have something called a diversity mentoring program as well, so there's several ones, so please do get in touch if you're interested. And just like Rita said, we're online team, but it doesn't matter if you're a student or alumni. Everyone wants to help you. You've got the careers team, so do reach out to us and we'll connect you to the right people.
I just wanted to add something really quickly to that, though, but ultimately, you are your own advocate. There's only so much a mentor can do, or a tutor, or a career advisor can do. Ultimately, you're the one that's going to be your own advocate and push yourself. You've got to get there. You've got to be motivated. You've got to exercise that passion.
Sharing a story. How do you deal with people who feel threatened by you?
Oh gosh, no one's actually told me that ever, so I'm not actually sure. I like to think of myself as a really good listener, and I've just always been a people person, so I'm very social. So even if maybe initially people might feel threatened for whatever reason, I think when someone has a chat or a conversation or a drink or, out in the foyer later on, hopefully that won't be the case. So for me, I like listening to people and I let them talk first and have a chat with them and sort of, I'm a person like everyone else,
Then just to jump in on that and sort of the final remarks, because we are on time right now. I don't think people feel threatened by me, but some people come up to me and say, Caroline, but you're doing so many things. Like, why are you not already in a job? Like, oh, that's so amazing. And they have no clue that literally my last essay, true story, handed in my degree. I did that 6:30 this morning from pulling an all-nighter. And yes, I had an extension for 2 weeks, but I started the essay 2 days ago. And anyway, that happens. So there's so many things happening behind, where actually when I talk to people now and I tell people about what I do, and I did Project Access, did Water Fund, I'm doing a lot of things with KBS. And they're like, do you sleep? I'm like, yeah, of course, because I'm human. And I go out drinking with my buddies, and I love to go to Nordic bar. Like, I have to put that side forward of myself so people understand that I'm human now, which is at least something that I try to do more and more, and then I hide away some of the other stuff, which is, it's still a part of me, but I just want to show off a different side. Just so that they get the more holistic view of what you do and not the polished LinkedIn version of just listing whatever you've done, but also the person point of view. And I think that wraps up really, really nicely. Thank you for all your amazing questions, first and foremost.
Great questions, guys. Thank you.
And thank you again to you, Rita, and to the careers team for organising.
Great. Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you, Rita. Can we give the term